What's up, everybody? This is one of the crazier places that I've found just exploring around on Google Earth, and it gets me to theorizing a lot. So I don't know if any of this is correct or not, but it's fun to let your brain run through the scenarios and possibilities and subtract out what makes sense or not. This is about 400 miles south of the Mediterranean in the middle of nowhere, Sahara Desert. And I found it a few years ago because of the black volcanic rock. You'll find these long black lines of ejecta all over desert areas. But what's kind of crazy about this one is you see how thin of a layer it is. Now, I've been out in the desert and hiked through this stuff, and it's usually a pretty good layer of volcanic rock or something. But you can see this is just a thin layer on the surface level. Which gets me to thinking, how did this very thin layer survive in the Sahara for tens of thousands of years and not get buried over like everything else? For that matter, how'd you get palm trees and grass growing way out here? I mean, this is seriously out there in the middle of nowhere. It looks like this for a couple hundred miles in every direction. Anyway, they say that the three large lakes are saltwater. They're not real clear if there's fresh water or not. I'm thinking there is for the plants, but yeah, I had to double check that real quick. But yeah, most plants would be killed by saltwater, so there must be fresh water there. And it looks like quite a bit of geothermal activity, like Yellowstone. Probably got a strong sulfur smell to it. But this is known as Wa on Namas, and I'll give you Wiki, which is the official explanation, and then Thunderbolts projects, and then mine. So, Wiki says this is a volcanic formation. The central scoria cone may only be a few thousand years old, possibly even of historical age. Now, historical age is since we've been writing history. Early geological studies estimated an age of less than 800 to 1,000 years old, which that's what got me interested in this area in the first place. You can see here that the wind has slowly but surely worked all this ejecta into windrows. Even mainstream agrees that Africa was green 5,000 years ago. I think it was a lot sooner. And my whole theory here is how this place and others like it might have played a role in how this became a barren Saharan desert. So even Wiki, which just means that's what academics are going to say about it, says that this thing had a major eruption 800 to 1,000 years ago. Well, where does that put us? It's right at the time of the earthquakes and flooding, and when they say that the island of Cyprus went from lush and green and beautiful to a desert island. Well, Cyprus is in the Mediterranean. This site is about 400 miles south of the Mediterranean, where we don't have any records of what has happened there for the last 700-800 years. But we know that the north side of the Mediterranean was going through all kinds of crap. The Rhine was flooding. What was that? Copenhagen Cathedral, Cologne Cathedral got flooded. And they say that the water couldn't be attributed to the rain alone. Even on the tops of mountains, springs were bursting forth. So what would make water burst up out of the ground somewhere? I'll just leave that out there in the ether. Thunderbolts Project said this. Martian topography, Mars, demonstrates, quote, erosion patterns like those in Libya. And they point to the nearby Lichtenberg figures, saying this unique configuration can be seen in acrylic blocks that are charged with thousands of volts at high amperage, leaving a tracery of the electrical pathway visible in the otherwise transparent plastic. It seems possible that lightning bolts of sufficient power could do the same thing to minerals in the earth on a continental scale. The same multi-branch canyons, steep walls, flat bottoms, similar to those in the Sahara, can be seen on Mars. They don't really explain the concentric circle pattern here, but maybe that's kind of 0 point for the lightning bolt. And it could be. I've seen some pretty compelling evidence that our geography is shaped on electrical magnetic lines in some cases, but I gotta say, here I'm looking at this and I see wind and or water erosion. And I'll say this about the people that we're seeing in these photos. This isn't a destination for your average tourist. When I first found this site a couple of years ago, there was actually a FBI badge on there, along with a really freaky face. I wish I saved the photo. But it's very difficult still today to get out this far into the desert. These are dignitaries and wealthy people. I mean, seriously, who packs a hot air balloon 400 miles out into the Sahara? But I have a theory about all this. There is a whole class of people out there in every single country, but in America, they don't go to the J.D. Rock education system. You look at world leaders around the world, and they all went to the same schools together. But I think that there is a certain level on the social ladder out there that there's a complete disconnect between the history we learn and the history they learn. And I've even seen this with some of the young, rich travel bloggers out there that some of the sites that they find most important to most people would just be like, why is that even interesting? But my theory here is that they know about this whole theory I've been going on about for 4 years now, that something big happened 700-800 years ago in our past. So to our wiki level academia, this is just a cinder cone out in the middle of a desert. But to them, they know that this is part of what wrecked the world 700 years ago. I don't know. It's just a theory, but I'll point it out next time I come across it. It's just like this, though. Why are these people out here digging around through a bunch of sand and volcanic rock? What do they think they're going to find here? It's just a volcano, right? All I'm saying is don't take for granted that everybody out there is looking at the world through the same lens that you are. What about this? Why would you be out there in the middle of the desert with your telescope in the middle of the daytime? I don't know. It could have been an eclipse. It could be something else that they're thinking about altogether. And I'm still really curious how all this vegetation got out here. I see two possible scenarios. One, they brought it all out here and planted it. Or two, this vegetation was already here before the whole Sahara was formed. This is what everything used to look like around here, and this is the last little pocket that has survived. And to me, that seems the most likely here. I don't know. There's a lot of I don't knows in my world, so forgive me. So every one of those stars, except for the ones north of the Mediterranean, I'm going to block those. Every one of those stars represents a crater. And a lot of them are quite similar to what we just were looking at. Start off over in the west with the Richat structure. Everybody's heard about this, but you probably haven't heard that it's not the only structure that looks like this. Because it's usually by people saying that this is Atlantis, and if there's more than one of these, then it's not Atlantis. I will say this, though. This old map that shows rivers and lakes all through the Sahara shows Mount Atlas right here in the general area of the Richat structure. But what a lot of people leave out of the Atlantis myth is the main city of Atlantis had all these concentric circles, but the land of Atlantis was supposed to be the size of Africa and Europe combined. So either a whole continent is no longer with us, or it was America or Antarctica. Anyway, looking at the surrounding area here, you've got a sand bed with all these huge rocks, well, big rocks strewn all over the place. And I think these are all ejecta, which is just rock that was spewed into the air as magma and then cooled to form a rock. It certainly looks like it is. And what they say about this is, although it resembles an impact crater, it is in fact a volcanic dome hardened and gradually eroded. Okay, well, let's look at some other nearby features. That was the center star. Now we're down at the bottom left. And we've got this crater that is in fact by a meteorite, and I'm not going to try to pronounce it. And all around the edges here, you have that black, burnt-looking rock. Then up to the north, you've got the Tenumer crater, formed by an impact event. And they even found a 8.5 kilometer depression under the ocean off of the coast. They suspect that that's an impact. And even though this is underwater, they're finding a big debris field of ejecta. So this all goes to show that volcanoes aren't the only way that you get molten rock flying down from the sky. It reminds me of this Catastrophism geology lecture I was listening to one time, where he was joking about starting a foundation for missing volcanoes. We've got all these places where you find apparent volcanic rock and there's no volcano anywhere around there. And his whole point was that it didn't come up from the ground, it came down from the sky. So those were the ones over to the left in the far west. We're going to go about 1,000 miles to the east now and look at these two. Both of these features are found where the star on the right was. You zoom in on the bottom one and you can see that to the left it's all a circular formation, and you do see a couple of concentric rings right in here. But the other one is just ring after ring after ring. It looks to me like if you dropped a pebble in water and then flash froze the water, or maybe even threw the rock at an angle and it all pushed towards that direction. Looking at it from the ground level, you just see this black rock that's jutting up out of the Sahara sands that have swallowed everything. And even out here, you have petroglyphs of antelope and foxes, or whatever those are, dogs. So within the Holocene period, the age of man, there was wildlife in this area. And then the last site here is the Aronga crater, which looks more like Atlantis than Atlantis does. They've nailed down the dating on this to definitely be less than 345 million years old. Give me a break, man. And evidently we're looking at the exposed remnant of the crater, so there's probably more buried underneath the sand there. The crater is accompanied by two nearby circular features that may be related impact craters, and that's the main part here for me. Aronga may be part of a crater chain. They don't specify which ones they suspect of being impact craters, but that's Aronga, the star down to the right, and it's right next to this huge volcanic field. And within it, you see a big, huge crater that you zoom inside of that, and there's crater after crater inside of there. And then this keeps spreading for 50, 100 miles to the northwest. So, first thing here, this is an impact crater, and this is an impact crater. But this, the Richat structure, is an old volcano. Now, I'm definitely no geologist, but if I had to put money down on whether or not these were all caused by the same forces, my money would be on yes. And like they said about the ones within a couple hundred miles of each other, this could possibly be a crater chain. It seems like pretty much all meteorites entering the atmosphere airburst. And I can show you dozens of fireballs that are caught on camera where the people went out and found the meteorite afterwards. There's professional meteorite hunters. But if you think about this in a sense of a 50-mile rock entering the atmosphere, then these don't look that far apart anymore. A lot like the Carolina Bays impact, they find spherules and debris fields scattered for 1,000 miles here. So I don't think these were all the same event. Al-Wan Namas looks like it happened just yesterday, where the Aronga crater does look like it's had plenty of erosion over time. Pretty much all of the impact craters that you do find are out in the desert, and I don't think that's just a coincidence. I think a major impact has the potential to turn an area into a desert. But back to the idea that impact craters are in close proximity to volcanic fields a lot of times, and the idea of water being forced up out of the ground and springs bursting forth on mountains. Well, I look at all of this a lot like their late heavy bombardment theory, which, for them it's 4 billion years ago. But you see how they're correlating comet, meteorite impacts with volcanoes? Well, I kind of see it the same way too. And if you look into their theory here, they're saying that impactors are the reason for all of the volcanism. And there's two ways of looking at this. One is that volcanic chains are found right on the plate boundaries, the tectonic plate boundaries. You have enormous amounts of friction, a rock pushing on other rock and actually melting the rock, and then volcanoes pop up. Everybody's seen this cutaway of the Earth where it's all molten rock down below us, but this is all just theory. Nobody's ever proven that it is. The Earth's crust varies from 3 to 43 miles, and the deepest we've ever physically dug was the Kola Deep Bore at 7.6 miles. They didn't drill into any lava there, but I will concede that that was right in the center of Siberia in the middle of a continent. So another theory of mine here, like I said, I'm just spitballing ideas. Let's say you have an impact event like the Chicxulub crater that supposedly took out the dinosaurs. This thing is 200 miles in diameter. That's the rim to rim measurement. So when I think about impact forces on that scale, this could be the reason for plate tectonics. Because if this hit, say, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean here, an impact like that could be the reason the Pacific plate is pushing into North America. And all of that friction is enough to literally melt the rock to start popping off volcanoes along plate boundaries. That doesn't mean that the whole center of the Earth is magma. I think it could be the heat from the friction right there in the crust that is causing the rocks to melt in the first place. So then the other side of this is the volcanoes that aren't anywhere near plate boundaries, like the one near the Aronga crater. Let's say hypothetically that you had a huge space rock coming in that was part rock and part steel or unobtainium or whatever. Then you get a big air burst, and the rock comes down and smacks the surface here and forms the Aronga crater. But then the denser iron part falls down over here where the volcano is. Well, that heavier, denser piece shoots down into the ground for 50 miles, like a bullet. So this thing was already red hot from entering the atmosphere. Then it smacks into the ground, going through the ground. It's creating all of this friction, which is melting everything around it. So then you have an effusion of molten rock and magma and ejecta, and the center of this forms what they call a cinder cone, which is just, they say it's an ancient volcano, but it's no longer active. Well, maybe it was only active in that short amount of time there. But you see how there's a huge depression here, and then in the center of it is the only spot that stuff actually bubbled up out of the ground. And this is that first place that I showed you with just the thin layer of black rock over the surface of everything. I don't know if I did a good job of explaining myself here, but I can picture it all in my head very well. And that would explain why people are out here picking through the rocks. There's nothing very impressive about some sand or some volcanic rocks, but if you found a tiny piece of a meteorite here, then that would be pretty impressive. Especially if you could go to your friends that were educated the same way you were and say, this is a piece of the meteorite that threw Europe into the Dark Ages 700 years ago. I guess that reference only works if you know my whole spiel about the timeline and everything. Anyway, like I said at the beginning, just a bunch of what ifs. I don't know. Just interesting to think about. So, hope you guys enjoyed it. Static out.